People have always been curious as to whether serial killers are a product of environmental or genetic factors. One must examine serial killers who experienced any form of childhood abuse, those who had a stable upbringing but still developed into murderers, and the specific mindsets of individual killers in history. They must find the connections between what trauma they experienced and their actions as a killer, while also dissecting the medical diagnosis of serial murders and how it may impact their actions. Serial killers have been in existence for hundreds of years, and with them has been the struggle of trying to figure out why a person can be brought to inflict such violence upon another. The tendencies of these people are mostly psychopathic, meaning their lack of emotions and normal mental function bring about their violent nature, whether it is due to nurture or nature. On the one hand, some believe that serial killers are formed due to a genetic predisposition. The warrior gene is one theory that supports genetics as a cause for this behavior. Tabitha Powledge says that the so-called warrior gene comprises particular variations in the X chromosome gene that produces monoamine oxidase A, also known as MAOA, an enzyme that affects the neurotransmitters dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. The variants known collectively as MAOA-L produce human MAOA knockouts with a low level of the enzyme. Basically, this gene lowers people's patience and ability to control their emotions and raises their irritability, therefore rendering them more easily aggressive. When a child is born with this in their DNA, they will show signs of impatience towards their peers that worsens as they grow older. Granted, this gene may be more present depending upon the person and situation, but it may serve as a gateway to much more aggressive behavior. Recent brain scans showed that psychopathy in criminals is associated with a lower connection between the amygdala, a brain structure that processes negative stimuli, and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which is located at the front of the brain and is responsible for interpreting the response from the amygdala. This low connectivity decreases the sensitivity of these two regions. This means that when negative stimuli are interpreted, no strong response is elicited. In short, people born with this brain connection don't show strong emotions, or any emotion really, to stimulants that normally provoke a strong emotional response. Because of this lack of emotions, people become more susceptible to develop violent or aggressive tendencies as they slowly become more and more disconnected from society and reality. When they are caught doing something bad, they don't feel guilt or embarrassment. They don't feel nervous upon examination. They don't feel sympathy at the suffering of others. This genetic disadvantage may not always result in one developing into a killer, but increases their chances of forming habits and tendencies commonly associated with killers. Ted Bundy, a notorious killer, rapist, and kidnapper during the 1970s, is just one example of a killer that we can examine to find if they were made from genetics or environmental factors, or a combination of the two. Bundy grew up in a stable home but always felt unwanted because his mother gave birth to him before she was married, which caused her so much shame. Considering this, Bundy displayed unusual interests in macabre and knives as early as the age of 3. He was very intelligent and did well in school, but lacked social skills and struggled to connect with his peers. As he grew older, he continued to be distant from most people. This was a prime signal that justified this man as a psychopathic killer because he lacked emotions but normal social cues as well. During his trials, the public saw he was manipulative and mentally unstable, which were two characteristics that aided him in murdering so many people. He lacked emotions such as empathy and guilt, but had such high amounts of self-confidence and violence to create the perfect mixture for a truly dangerous and deadly machine. On the other hand, some claim serial killers are made from severe emotional or physical trauma and abuse that brings them to such violence. Ellison Cooper says that the fact that 68% of serial killers suffered some form of childhood abuse strongly supports the blank slate idea that there is in fact a learned or cultural aspect to serial killing. What are the odds of someone becoming a serial killer if they were raised in a loving, supportive, and stable home? Abuse, neglect, or torment serve to degrade a person not only physically, but psychologically, especially if it occurs during childhood when they are at a very vulnerable and impressionable state. This can contribute to the idea of brain disconnectivity that hinders emotions, except it is not present at birth. The emotional trauma one may endure in their life has great potential to affect their mental stability in ways that could leave them with enough violence and aggression to turn into a killer. Going back to the killer Ted Bundy, who may have had a relatively stable family life, but there were a few events in his life that caused him to slip even further mentally. When he was a child, Bundy grew up thinking his mother was his sister to hide the fact that she had him outside of marriage and she was ashamed of him. Once he was an adult, he fell in love with a beautiful and wealthy woman to whom he grew deeply attached. She had everything that he wanted: money, class, and influence. He was devastated by their breakup. Many of his later victims resembled his college girlfriend, attractive students with long, dark hair. He developed frustration and a sense of hatred towards this woman once she broke up with him, which triggered his response and targeted other women who reminded him of her. While some killers choose their victims at random, others, like Bundy, choose based off what gives them the most satisfaction. This kind of thing happens a lot when killers have specific victims depending on their mental background. They divide into types: those who feel bound to rid the world of people they regard as immoral or undesirable, such as drug addicts, immigrants, or promiscuous women, are called missionaries. Black widows kill men, usually to inherit money or to claim insurance. Bluebeards kill women, either for money or an assertion of power. A nurse who kills patients is called an angel of death. A troller meets a victim by chance, and a trapper either observes his victims or works at a place, such as a hospital, where his victims come to him. This shows a clear-cut connection between the trauma they experienced and how it plays a part in the violence that results. Another study showed that early childhood abuse or neglect often leads to post-traumatic stress disorder or phobias, but anxiety disorders are typically associated with psychopathy itself. Though I concede that psychopathy is what people normally attribute serial killing to because it consists of mental disorders that probably do lead to these tendencies, I insist that these anxiety or PTSD disorders stem from trauma that occurred in one's life. While they may be put in different categories of mental illnesses, anxiety and trauma-related mental damage are closely related and can both lead to aggression, lack of emotions, and violent tendencies without the person having been born with these characteristics. Whether the urge to take a life is ingrained in our brains since birth or not, murder has been and probably will always be something to fear in our world. We may never find out what truly turns people into serial killers, but we know for sure that they exist, and their presence will always have an impact on society and humanity. Psychologists cannot pinpoint an exact reason as to why people develop these tendencies, but through continuous examination of the brain of serial killers and psychopaths, we can get relatively close to an accurate answer. Every case and every person varies, so as researchers dissect the issue, they must consider that maybe there is not a definite answer. The conclusion we can draw is that with brain abnormalities at birth that contribute to emotional deficiencies on top of childhood trauma of any sort can psychologically degrade a person to the cold, violent, and bloodthirsty image that we picture when we say serial killer.